Good afternoon, everyone. Just in the interest of time, I know there's some conversations happening in the room, but we are going to proceed to the next announcement. So, again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeremy Van Loon. I'm the team leader for outreach and engagement at C4 and the Global Landscape Forum. Welcome, and thanks, everyone, for coming today. Post-lunch on a Sunday afternoon is always a bit of a difficult ask. But we do have an exciting set of announcements this afternoon. South Pole Group, a consultancy that works on financing around carbon, works with governments and businesses to optimize deep carbonization, is here to tell us a little bit about an initiative and a new fund that they're launching. It will be launched later in the year. Just on a side note, or not a side note, an important note, but South Pole also worked with the Global Landscapes Forum, Bonn 2019, our annual conference, to certify that it is in fact a carbon neutral event. So that's great. We have some more details on that if you're interested. But for now, we'll leave it at that. Here to talk about this new fund that South Pole is launching is Urs Dietrich. And we were just chatting about, Urs has worked in the carbon space for a while. He studied forestry at the University of Munich and has a master's degree in environmental management from Yale, and is now the land use fund manager at South Pole. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Urs. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I guess we're about kilometer 35 in a 42-kilometer marathon after plenty of wonderful events and an inspiring weekend. Thank you for accompanying me on the last couple of steps. I'm here to talk about a landscape impact fund that we are currently developing and hoping to get a lot of feedback and challenging discussions on later on. Before I start, $300 billion is what we need in conservation investment each year. And that's private investment. Currently, we're sitting at about 10 billion. So times 30 what we're currently doing, and we have a decent shot at really, making nature the important priority that it is for our planet and for people. 3 billion of these 10 billion come from the offsets markets, so it's definitely a very, very small tool, but it is one that does have potential and that South Pole obviously has some experience and background in. However, we also believe that we need to go beyond that and find solutions that are scalable to the extent that they are meeting the potential and the necessity of this century. Before I start, though, just earlier I was thinking, what right do I have to stand here and talk about these issues and about the climate crisis and severe conservation problems that we're facing? And I was so inspired yesterday, for example, at the reception when we had a wonderful plenary and dances and some very very wise words spoken. And I was thinking, I'm from the Western developed world. I'm, white male. Like, what do I have to offer? I represent basically the majority of the paradigm that has created a lot of the issues also that we're currently facing. And, I remember back a moment in 2011. I was in Borneo, in the rainforest. I was hiking through it with a hammock and a backpack. My dad did his PhD in this area, and he showed me around to show me what he saw in the 70s and what is left of it. And I spent a night at Penan village. Penan are a tribe of nomadic people on the island of Borneo, Indonesia and Malaysia. And this one particular person that I stayed at didn't stay in the village, but outside. And I visited him. He was a few kilometers away from the village, very hidden in a small shack. And I was sitting there with him. It was raining, pouring down rain, and in the evening I was sitting with him in the shack, and he told me, as much as I understood, how he, for decades, had been fighting against some big industry interests, mostly the timber industry, encroaching their habitat and their area, and that he couldn't dare living with his own people in the village because of the danger of him potentially suffering from an accident, an intentional accident, and that he had been for decades, for example, pouring water into the diesel tanks of some big logging trucks and other facilities representing what he felt was encroaching in his area. And therefore, a friend of his had also vanished from the area without any notice, and that he was feeling he had probably been murdered. And I think that's not a single incident, and this person is living there outside, not with his community, but he's taken on something that he believes in and that he's suffering for decades, living alone, but continuing a fight that he feels he has to do because it's his belief system and his values that command him to do so and to stand up for it. And that night I laid in the hammock and it was raining, and I saw his little dog outside the shack, completely wet and miserable, and I looked at this poor little dog and thought, like, wow, I'm with them right now in this moment, but tomorrow I'm gonna walk on and walk into a different life again, and he's gonna, stay, the dog and the Panan. I don't know who appeared more, on the one hand miserable, but on the other hand proud and exactly where they belonged to be, because that was their fight. They were fighting, and they were willing to fight. And I was wondering, as I was walking away from that, where, what's my fight exactly? I always knew I wanted to do environmental work, but where am I going to apply my work? And then I thought, I want to work in a way that makes sure such big interests cannot inflict on other people's rights in such a tremendous way as I witnessed it right there. And from that on, I went on a search working for the United Nations, for non-governmental organizations, and finally ending up in the finance industry, because I thought, wow, this is like the linchpin of a lot of problems. And we can either promote unsustainable business as usual, or by working with the finance industry, really achieve impact at scale and impact exactly these industries that are not, exactly, known for ensuring people's rights and changing them for the better. And I don't think most people don't want to do intentionally bad things, but I think we can enable a lot of those people that do have, the minds in the right place to really do a lot better. And that's what we're trying to do also with this fund that we're launching, trying to use finance for the good. So I hope you're going to find it interesting, and I'm looking forward to now talking with you about our Landscape Impact Fund. South Pole was founded in 2006 by 5 social entrepreneurs believing in climate solutions and trying to embed climate solutions at the heart of companies' successful business practices. And since 2006, we have saved about 170 million tons of CO2, developed over 700 projects, have saved or restored about 5.5 million hectares of forests. We've created about 100,000 jobs with our initiatives, and are hoping to scale these activities up a lot more. How many hectares? 5.5 million. So, yeah, thank you very much for this, and maybe we just go ahead right in. Is there any other question before I start? Okay. Yes, absolutely. So the question was if I could talk about some of the social and environmental safeguards that we're applying with the fund that we are currently developing. Yes, I will get into this in just a minute, and I do find it's a tremendously important question, and thank you for asking it. All right, I do this here myself. We know that landscapes have a tremendous potential in achieving what we need to achieve. And I think we need to shift landscapes from being a part of the problem to a huge part of the solution. Several studies have come out showing that nature-based solutions can contribute more than a third to the climate mitigation potential that we're needing in order to stay below 2 degrees Celsius warming. And 1/3 of these over 30% are actually achievable at a price lower than $10 per ton of carbon, so really well within reach of what we're currently sitting at. And this is what we're trying to target. The good news about nature-based solutions is, unlike other climate mitigation strategies, it comes with a host of free benefits, and not like benefits in terms of kind of like, whatever, put your email address in here and claim your free reward with strings attached, but really like freebies. I'm talking about soil fertility, biodiversity, social values, local economies, and this is really why nature-based solutions are such a wonderful tool that is underutilized. So why is it underutilized? 300 billion of opportunity, of necessity for private investment. There's a lack of bankable projects, meaning projects that have certain structures in place and the beginning of a business model that would lure in investors for scaling that business model and then later on mainstreaming it. And then those few projects that we have, and we have some wonderful funds already that are starting to get at these projects don't really include a landscape approach in most cases. And we believe that a landscape approach, meaning really working with a lot of actors, having the capacity to facilitate stakeholder dialogues and to include the manifold perspectives that are existing locally, integrating that into an investment vehicle, that is something that we are achieving and that we're trying to achieve with the Landscape Impact Fund. So right now here, this is a little bit of a construct. Our fund bundles private and public capital sources to enable nature-based emission reductions and landscape initiatives at scale. And we do believe that these two funding streams really work synergistically. We are offering a foundation that's non-for-profit to target public funders, corporate funders, and philanthropic funders to then either receive premium carbon credits as a return or landscape initiatives through a TA facility that we're offering. Technical assistance is very, very important to us because the way we're using carbon is maybe not the traditional way. Maybe you remember back in 2011, 12, well, 12 it already went down, but before that, for example, I remember I was in Durban, COP17, United Nations Climate Change Conference, wandering through the aisles, and I saw all these carbon developers and carbon projects, investment opportunity here and there, and it was a huge, huge hype and big, big interest. And I was even interviewed by German television asking me about RED+, and I was out there, RED+ is the future and the carbon markets. And then, well, things crumbled a little bit. And nobody wanted to talk about carbon anymore. The prices plummeted. I was thinking to myself, oh God, like I'm out there on YouTube saying RED+ is the future. Who's gonna believe that now? How can carbon ever be part of the solution anymore after it proved not to be a stable market? But we luckily do see an uptick in interest quite significantly, and we have seen it grow since about 2016, and we are now at record highs in interest and issuances and retirements of voluntary emissions reductions that we're very, very excited about, and particularly nature-based emissions reductions with all their co-benefits. Now, how do we use this here? We are trying to use carbon in a way to incubate sustainable business models on the ground, and through an upfront financing commitment from our funders, enable new project development and instead of just using issuances, credits from existing projects and bringing them to the market. We're really trying to use all that money to develop new projects with a particular focus on sustainable business models, and that then later on in a second step, either through an external actor that we're going to partner with, or by developing that potential within ourselves, to use that for impact investments of reimbursable finance. So now we're really talking about scaling business models and enabling a growth that contributes to the 300 billion that we still need from our current 10 billion. The nature-based emission reductions for us are mostly interesting for corporate funders, meaning big international companies with agricultural supply chains that do want to offset those parts of their emissions that they can't mitigate and reduce through their own actions, to offset them with nature-based solutions instead of other, large quantity credits from other technologies that might not offer all these benefits that this funding vehicle is trying to achieve. And the charming thing about this is that we're offering a guarantee delivery, which means people invest now and they'll get credits later. Who will know that these credits will be generated? How can we entice corporates to invest? Here we'll give the guarantee to cross-source in the case of underperformance of projects from projects as similar as possible on the market, given South Pole's market reach, other credits that will enable them to at least still be able to meet their climate targets that they came to us to solve for them and with them together. On the landscape and project design funding stream, we are really happy to be able to provide a synergy effect and a leveraging mechanism where public grants and philanthropic grants and donations will always stimulate more private investment, and therefore one playing on the other, so therefore really trying to scale things up. And with our roster of experts in different countries and a conservation NGO that we're partnering with that is actually also going to be responsible for our safeguards and our environmental and social performance, to make sure that we have a third-party assurance of whatever we're doing instead of all doing everything within the fund management team. We are currently developing a set of metrics, of safeguards, of monitoring systems to make sure that we really have a cutting-edge and state-of-the-art SDG impact assurance mechanism. We know that it's a tremendously fascinating and complicated topic, metrics and indicators, and thinking about it in the right way in the first place. So we are very, very open to receiving all of your inputs as well. I've spent many a night over the last 8-9 years thinking about these things, and I still haven't found the solution. So I hope we can use this as a little bit of a crowdsourcing opportunity as well for our social and environmental safeguards beyond the investment mechanisms that I'm very hopeful to talk about in more detail with you later. Upfront, it's upfront capital commitments in a nutshell. We have 2 synergistic investment streams. We do offer a leading governance structure through a not-for-profit organization that will also, among others, entice philanthropic donors to invest with us, because we will be able to then also ensure certain tax benefits of these charity donations. And a deal-by-deal approach that's offering flexibility to our funders. Investors often want to have a tailor-made product and are sometimes reluctant to invest in a fund that has sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. And by really understanding each deal separately and also having an investment committee where there's going to be participatory rights, we will want to ensure flexibility and everybody is feeling well connected and feeling ownership over our fund. That's a quick exemplary project that could be something that we would invest in. And we are here looking at a forest restoration project where a buffer zone between remaining natural forests and encroaching agricultural development is being reforested with communities, and at the same time thereby ensuring the conservation of natural forests that are adjacent to these plots. And in addition, and that is exactly what we're looking at, there is a development of sustainable business models going on the ground, meaning, first of all, tree nurseries, but that's also the development of processing facilities for cocoa, the development through technical assistance of agroforestry systems that would grow rattan, peanuts, cocoa, and other interesting crops that have a local market, and to understand where is there a market for certain products and use that in the technical assistance to then, together with local cooperatives and communities, work on incubating these businesses, and then later on using partners or reimbursable investments to bring them to scale and to a bigger market. So now here is a summary. We do offer the development of a nonprofit organization. We do have a leveraged impact by developing new projects on the one hand, and also then by facilitating co-financing also from external partners. That's another important point, that on the local project level, we're trying to, through our network, engage other funders as well to become active, and there is a lot of interesting funds and potential investors that are interested, including at an impact investment scale, or local banks and microfinance institutions. Through that fund approach, beyond that, we do offer economic efficiencies and general risk mitigation through the diversification that our portfolio offers. And the third-party assurance, which is very important to us to really understand how an independent party can ensure an integrated framework against which our performance is going to be assessed, to really make sure we're not fooling ourselves about that we are achieving the impacts that we're setting out to achieve. With that, I want to leave it and want to open the stage for discussions and challenging questions. And I hope to hear from you. I can always be contacted via email, and I'm happy to set up a call to talk about partnerings, to talk about interesting projects and landscape initiatives on the ground, to just talk about the business models and anything that might bring us further together. Thank you very much.
So, do we have any questions from the audience for Urs? If not, I might start with a question for you, Urs. It's a quite a complex fund that you're trying to put together, and I think when you aggregate these sort of smaller projects, it requires pretty significant on the ground partnerships and relationships. How is that going to work? Like, how have you developed that? I mean, what kind of partners are you going to be working with to ensure that you have, the stakeholder relationships and building that kind of foundation?
Yeah, good point. We are working together with a conservation organization that works in many different countries as well, and has a local presence in a lot of important biodiversity areas. And we're also working together with incubation hubs that will include a lot of small businesses and landscapes, entire landscapes, not just projects, to then flow into our deal pipeline.
That's great. Got a question over here.
So a recent paper, I don't know if it's been disseminated yet, but suggested that two things. One, that local funds that focus investments on communities that already are cohesive and where there's already a system of governance work much better in terms of both economic and environmental benefits. So I want to know to what extent you are being guided by the evidence that exists out there now about what works.
Thank you very much. Yes, so a big scrutinizing of the currently existing literature, both scientific as well as publications by a lot of non-governmental organizations, development finance institutions, and just also the hearsay of what we know through our local implementation partners is definitely what guides our thinking and our project design. The good thing about South Pole as well is we are a very decentralized organizations with specialists in all the areas that we're going to be active in, thereby not falling prey to the idea that there's going to be one centralized fund manager that will try to impose everything from above. So yes, we do very closely look at the current developments, and also a lot of wonderful think tanks that are doing work on community development and interesting governance structures on the ground that are very interesting. And the question now is, how can we scale them? Are they scalable? Because it turns out a lot of approaches that work on the ground very well and have proven to do so, they're sometimes not as scalable because then things start to fall apart. So that's where we're now trying to have to experiment, and I'm hoping to also potentially get some input and experiences from some of you, where that might be, at what level, depending on the activities. But we're very interested in exactly staying at the pulse of these developments to constantly also update our models.
Earlier in the landscape finance session, we heard a lot about this issue of time and waiting on these long time frames to get, for the investors to get returns. And do you have that issue, or you focus more on already developed landscape approaches, or do you find, that how do you navigate this issue of getting returns in this long wait of time as related to the risk?
Yeah, so that's definitely a key issue that relates to every kind of land use investment. Land use and conservation tends to have significant upfront costs and delayed returns. And especially when we're working in a lot of countries that are not as economically developed and whose financial system might not just be as developed as, for example, financial systems in Europe or in Northern America, then the problem often is financial risk, currency risk, meaning investors discount these projects overly because they believe there might be currency risk, meaning exchange rate fluctuations, and then there comes political risk on top of that. So there are a lot of macroeconomic risks that don't even have to do anything with the success of the projects on the ground, and that therefore overly penalize these awesome ideas on the ground. That's why a lot of projects have had problems, really taking off. We're trying to combat that through the integration of various revenue streams. For example, when you have an afforestation project, you're typically going to wait a few years until there's the first thinning, and then potentially some type of revenue neutral cutting of some of the trees, and then real returns will come, depending on what you're doing, what species of trees you're using, will maybe return after 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, and then full capital recovery, depending, if you have fast-growing tree species, very fast-growing tree species, we might be talking about like 12, 13, 14 years. In many cases, that's a lot longer, especially if you're working with multi-species natural reforestation. So we're trying to complement that with agricultural products, for example, either just annual plants, that could be anything from corn to beans. There could be perennial, multi-annual crops that grow and then give you a first harvest maybe after a year or 2 or 3, and therefore shortening some of the time span. However, with our mechanism, we're trying to also include some other carbon finance and potential cross-sourcing from other projects to, at the beginning, bridge that gap until some actual carbon revenues will be able to flow into these projects because they're being newly developed. So that's a mechanism we're trying to employ here effectively, and we're testing that, so we'll see how that's going to work.
Thank you very much. My name is Elisa Romanato. I work for the Climate Policy Support Program at GIZ. And I have 2 questions. I wanted to ask for the technical assistant component, with whom do you work together? And then the second question is whether you have a regional focus. If you focus on specific region countries. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take the second question first. We don't have a regional focus. We do work in all tropical regions, and not only tropical, but also subtropical areas. We are having a focus on generally less developed countries. In terms of the first question, we do work together with a conservation organization that currently, since we're very much in the early development, we're not going to name, but we are really relying and collaborating with actually a plethora of local partners then beyond the conservation organization that we're currently co-developing this funding platform model with. Because as you may know, there's a lot of very, very interesting citizen engagement going on in a lot of countries and a lot of places, and you need to develop local literacy to understand who might be your best partner. And I, sitting right here, cannot tell you for each region which one that would be, but we do have local intelligence out there that are very well versed locally, and actually in most cases really are from these particular regions and countries, and are therefore going to find the particularly best suited implementation partners.
This is super interesting, and as you know, we've chatted a bit about it, and I think it's really exciting that you guys are thinking about this sort of blended mechanism. My question is about scale, and when you talk about some of these landscape investments, we were talking about it in the previous panel as well, you end up having kind of multiple revenue streams, as you just described. You might have like a bit of corn, or a bit of cocoa, or a bit of timber, and other things, and none of those individual projects or none of those individual revenue streams are particularly big. And so how are you guys thinking about the investment itself? Are you thinking about incubating or investing in each individual revenue stream separately, or is it like one overall for a farmer or for a landscape? Can you talk a bit about that and how that would work?
Yeah, so in general, the carbon funding mechanism is something that will help us in exactly these areas where general revenue streams just aren't big enough. And this is where we find carbon is a very interesting model, because it's one of the very few models we have that actually finances conservation or biodiversity if you do it right. It's literally a currency that enables us to finance that. I think another way to finance actual conservation and not just quote unquote, sustainable agriculture or sustainable other commodity production, sustainable seafood, sustainable something I can consume as a human. But when we're really talking about biodiversity for the sake of itself, more or less, or conservation just for preserving the natural capital and the ecosystem that we are relying on for climate resilience, that one way to finance that could be, for example, ecotourism, basically assigning a value to the presence of wonderful natural ecosystems and understanding how much do we as a human species value these areas, how much are we willing to pay for these types of areas to continue to exist, and therefore, for example, monetize that value through ecotourism. And hopefully we'll live in a world where there will be more of a holistic accounting of natural capital as well, and not just purely financial bookkeeping, but also natural capital values and other values. So I think ecotourism is a way to increase the revenue that we can achieve from pure biodiversity and conservation values. And I think particularly since we are acting and working in very key biodiversity hotspots, that might be a good option. And on top of that, as I just said, carbon as the centerpiece currently of our business model, where we think with nature-based carbon credits, we can, on top of the revenue we get from tangible products for the local people that are organizing cooperatives or other institutionalized settings, that we can therefore distribute, finance the training of such other revenue streams on top of that. But that's something we're all trying out and really happy to continue to discuss about also after this panel and in general over the next months and years, because I think we should all really engage in dialogues and understand how we can each help each other by being honest to each other and really saying, there might be some significant challenges that you're not looking at and that you might run into, and therefore offering maybe alternatives that according to each other's experience would work better.
I think your carbon model, carbon crediting, is very interesting. But what a little bit concerning to me is because your fund require private company fund to get the carbon credit. So in terms of if you have a forest, all the carbon credit will go to private companies that fund that fund. So what happens if the country of the host of the landscape that you are funding want the carbon credits? And so would there be a dispute between private company who obviously give you the money to get that credit, but that forest is in another country who might want to use that carbon credit as well?
Yeah, that's a question I've thought about for a long time as well, because it seems like we definitely need to avoid double counting, and that's a serious issue. However, it seems to be resolved, and there has been, recently, there was a meeting also by the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, and clearly found that reporting and claiming of emissions reductions are two different pairs of shoes. And if one company claims, hey, I am carbon neutral with this project that I'm financing in country X can still report these emissions as having taken place in that country, and therefore only through that mechanism be included in the new climate framework and our mechanism in Article 6 and our new climate agreement. And the company that claims them for itself is not actually at all it's basically two different levels at which you're looking at it, and claiming it by the company is something else, and reporting it by the country where it actually took place.
Question over here. If we could get a microphone. Oh, it's okay. We've got people online as well, so.
So a couple of questions. To what extent, my name's Coimbra Sirica, and I'm going to give myself away because I do a lot of work with indigenous and people in local communities. So to what extent are you making some of your partnerships of focus on indigenous people and local communities? To what extent would you make community rights important to be recognized on any land that you go into? Would you be asking yourselves the question, who does this land belong to? Not only in terms of whether the governments recognize them, but also who they think, the people who live there, do they think this is their land? So to what extent are you bringing them? And you mentioned participatory, on sort of an investment committee or something. And so I was wondering who's on that committee. And then the other thing is, let's see, I wrote down questions. The other thing is sort of interesting that, at one point, Forest Trends, I think, did a study of, which carbon credits had the most value, or which, and it turned out that indigenous people and forest stories sold for more money. And so I'm wondering whether you all have thought about valuing the stories, and once they've been valued, if that money goes to the communities about whom the stories are being told, because they're used as marketing tools for all of the companies. So they're not only paying for the carbon credit, they're also promoting themselves internally with the morale in the company. They also use it to promote themselves externally as well. So those stories have value.
Very much so, yes. I'll try to answer in the order that you asked, but I think especially the first and the third question do sort of go together. So maybe I'll take out the second one first, which was about the Participatory Investment Committee. We are going to offer to investors, both on the private and the public and the philanthropic sides, to join an investment committee to take part in the decision-making process. There will always be valuable discussions on that. However, we are not sure how much power, obviously, we will give to certain voices that will be part of that, because that is something we'll have to find out what are the preferences. We do want to enable investors to have a say in what is going to happen, and especially when it comes to grants, for example, we want to make sure that grants are definitely ring-fenced for the types of activities that they're intended to promote. For example, if we get a grant that would be targeted at ensuring that customary rights of indigenous communities are being transcribed into recognized regional or national land rights and tenure rights, then obviously we would want to work on exactly these types of activities on the ground, and thereby also, I think, having participation from these granting organizations in the investment process obviously would help a lot. But since we don't actually do a fund where we just invest in a pool of projects without any without any specific funding to any one project. We're also enabling funding to just one project. For example, if we have one of these landscapes where indigenous rights are a particularly important issue, and we do have the luck basically to acquire a grant that would us enable to work on these things. We want to work on these things, and I think that now goes into question 1 and 3. We do. You're right in that, well, generally land use credits have the most value in the carbon markets, and particularly smallholder, local, and smaller projects. And we think that's a very, very good thing. And since we are creating a non-for-profit organization, a foundation, we are definitely going to circle any type of revenue that is being created back into the landscapes, because this is what we're trying to do, to scale and use as much of the revenue we can create to implement more activities. So that's definitely not something we are then going to give away to the companies, for example, because what they're getting is the credits, but not the money. They're giving the money. And the carbon credits currently have a value of $0.1 to about $70 per ton. So it's a huge range. And the average between, $3 and $5. And smaller participatory forest management, afforestation projects do have a higher value. So we want to give that extra value into the community to develop other activities. And the grant side is definitely something we're going to use for whatever we get grants for. So any grant that we think is aligned with our program of activities, be that water use rights agreements, be that facilitating local stakeholder dialogues, be that offering particular conservation agriculture workshops, agroforestry, or incubating business models for community cooperatives. We're going to do anything that relates to land use and landscapes, and that will allow us to synergistically promote further investment in the area. And I thank you for pointing out indigenous peoples in general, because it's also something that's very deep to my heart, and often they are being left out of the discussion, or they have been made use of in the past, as you say, a poster child, and just marketing, and then somebody else claimed all the revenues. And that's definitely something that we feel very poorly about, that has happened. And we are definitely there to show there's other ways to do that and to use carbon for the good as a tool to finance conservation. Did I also answer any other side thoughts that you were having?
I'd love to harass you later.
Yes, please.
Any other questions from the audience? If not, I might have one last question. Urs, you mentioned the scale of the investment that's required. I think the $300 billion annually. How much would you imagine being able to sort of bite off of that amount with this in a best case scenario a few years down the road?
Well, as much as we can. That's definitely the very most precise answer I can give you. We're following a deal-by-deal approach, where we're going to include more and more projects and landscapes that fit our investment criteria into the funding pool, and then grow as much as the business interest and the grant mechanism interest allows us. And we know that there is a funding gap, and that institutional investors are mostly interested in fund sizes and investment ticket sizes of 200 million and up. So I would say, why not generally shoot for that? However, knowing that realistically we're not right now targeting institutional investors, but generally impact investors later on, high net worth individuals, family offices, and here funds that are in some ways comparable, but maybe offer other things that we don't. Therefore, we offer things that they don't. They are, achieving something north of 50 million. So I think somewhere around this ballpark is where we can go.
Great, thanks very much. Well, thanks to everyone for joining us, and thanks, Urs, for sharing this really exciting new initiative. And I think you had mentioned if there are any follow-up questions, you're around for a little bit longer, and your contact details were on there. So feel free, I guess, to the audience to reach out. And have a great afternoon, everyone. Enjoy the last bit of the GLF. Thanks.
Thank you very much.